Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. Here's the president of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Welcome, everyone. This is John Denuzzo of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. We're at part 2 of discussions on Benedict Arnold with Jack Kelly. He's the author of SAVE Benedict Arnold, Valcour, Band of Giants, other award-winning books on American history. Jack will continue discussing with us the military exploits of Benedict Arnold here today. Welcome back, Jack.
Well, thank you, John.
Now, we touched a little bit last week on Peggy Shippen. In fact, we had a guest on earlier talking about the program Turn. And, of course, Arnold is a big part of that, which is a fictionalized account of Washington spy network. Getting to Peggy Shippen, I mean, do you feel that Arnold would have turned traitor if he hadn't married his second wife?
I'd have to say yes to that question. I certainly understand the fascination with Peggy Shippen. It's a kind of a romantic aspect of the story. The coincidence of him marrying her in 1779, and then only a few months later, he started having contact with the British and passing them intelligence. As far as the time goes, it would point to her involvement. She was certainly involved in the back and forth between the British in New York and Arnold in Philadelphia. She certainly supported him. But having said all that, the sense I have of Benedict Arnold, I can't really feel that he would have been influenced by her or anybody else. I think he was very much his own man. I think women in those days were less influential maybe than could have been or should have been. And she was 19 years old. The idea of her convincing him to completely change his stripe just seems a little bit beyond what I can accept.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's focus a bit on Arnold after he changed sides. In what battles did he fight for the British? Was he effective? How was he received by his peers in the rank and file in the British Army?
One thing that he expected to happen once he went over to the British, and of course he'd hoped to hand over West Point as well, but he thought that it was going to set off a cascade of other officers and other men from the Patriot ranks to follow him into the British. He felt that he was so popular a general, and that the troops and other officers would see the error of their ways and would join him in joining the British. That didn't happen, and I think it was a big disappointment for him. He had a hard time even filling a loyalist regiment. He tried to attract people to enlist them in a loyalist regiment that he was going to lead. He was sent down to Virginia with loyalist and British forces. He did lead them in battles down there, the raids on Richmond. They almost captured Jefferson and Monticello. He was quite successful in his strategy. As always, as he had been for the Patriots, he was a natural warrior and a natural strategic thinker. At the end of that period, in September of 1781, he was sent up to New London and led a raid there against privateers who were preying on British shipping. The town got burnt down. Whether he ordered it is not really clear. There was a massacre of militiamen in a nearby fort there. He did not order that, but was under his command. And that was his last operation. That was his last military operation in America. A month later, Yorktown, he got out while the getting was good and went to England with his wife and family. And that was the end of his career in America. So fairly consequential, I'd say, but it wasn't decisive in the war in any way.
Yeah, it was not a game changer that I guess he might have anticipated it being. As you said, the war for him ends. He goes to England with his wife and a family. What was his life like in England after the revolution ended?
Well, it was kind of a mixed bag. They were treated quite well by the British authorities. All their sons were made British officers. Peggy got a stipend of her own. He got paid a certain amount of money. They set up in London, but they were not very popular there. They were hissed when they went to the theater. Nobody likes a traitor. Arnold was a prickly character to begin with, so he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But the main source of his unhappiness in his later life was he wanted to get back to being in active service for the British Army. He had found out that he had this great gift for making war. The military was his life, really, and he wanted to be back in active service. He tried numerous times to get commissioned roles in the British Army, and the officers always opposed him, partly because he was a traitor. They didn't trust him, partly because he had killed so many British soldiers as a rebel. So that was never to be that he would, again, become a military figure. He became a merchant, pretty much adopted the life that he'd had before the Revolutionary War began, trading down to the West Indies. He and Peggy lived in Canada for a few years, but never really very happy, and missed the action of being in the Army.
So do you think perceptions of Arnold have changed over time, or is today's view of Arnold the same as it was in the 1780s?
No, I think there's been a variety of different reactions to Arnold. The first one was shock that the celebrity general would actually switch sides. People hated him. They held him up as the epitome of treason, of villainy. They made up all kinds of myths about him, and particularly they tried to diminish the history of his accomplishments. Talking about, for example, the capture of Fort Ticonderoga, his role in that was diminished. The Battle of Saratoga, he was not given credit. There was absurd stories that he was drunk or he had been relieved of his command at Saratoga. And really, those stories did go on and diminish Arnold's reputation for a long time, up until I'd say in the last 50 years. There's been biographies that have come out that are much more balanced, recognize his faults, but really give him credit for his achievements. So there's been a feeling among historians and among a lot of people who are devotees of the Revolutionary War that really put Arnold in a light that I think is much more accurate than the way it was perceived before.
Now, we know of Arnold's very high-profile roles at Ticonderoga and captured by the Patriots and the battles of Saratoga. To your knowledge, was he ever at Lake George?
I can't point to a document that shows that he was actually standing on the shore of Lake George, but in fact, his first brush with the military when he was 16, his local militia from out in Norwich, Connecticut, actually marched up to Fort William Henry during the siege. So that was in 1757. Arnold was 16, and they got word before they reached the fort that it had fallen, so they didn't continue on and actually get to Lake George, but he was headed there. There's another story that I've heard that before the Revolutionary War, he would buy horses up in Canada as part of his merchant business, and during the winter, they would herd like 100 horses down the lakes, with the lakes totally frozen over, down Lake Champlain, then down Lake George, and then get down to the Hudson River, ship the horses to New York, and sell them down in the West Indies. So that was part of his business as a merchant in those days. And certainly during the period from 1775 to 1776, he spent a lot of his time in the Lake George area. Patriot Army came back from Canada in 1776. The hospital was opened up to quarantine the men who had caught smallpox up there, and Arnold was responsible for a lot of the business that was going on in that area. So he was certainly in the area, and whether he ever touched Lake George water or not, I'm not sure.
All right. Well, fair enough. Jack, as always, it's been very interesting speaking with you. I encourage everyone to read God Save Benedict Arnold and Valcour, my favorite, and other of Jack Kelly's books. You can find where to get them or actually purchase them on jackkellybooks.com. You can also have a link on that website to Jack's history blog, which is called Talking to America. A reminder, our website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org. Jack Kelly, thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you, John. It's really been a pleasure.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more on this topic, check out the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance podcast, a weekly feature on Lake FM 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. For more information, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and tune in every Saturday morning for Lake George Battlefield Moments.